we're coming in with a little bit of weird energy today because I went to sleep at 5 a.m. Hello everyone, my name is Mac and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today we're going to be doing the mid-year freakout book tag. So according to Storygraph, I have read 26 books so far and the number of pages is 9,500. As you can see, most of the books that I've read have the adventurous tag. I really love escapism, and an adventure is the most interesting thing to escape into, so that totally makes sense. No surprise to anyone, 92% of the books that I've read this year are fiction and 8% are non-fiction. Now, I have been trying to read more non-fiction, but it seems like I just keep going back to fiction. I keep going back to what's comfortable. I keep going back to what I'm used to, and that is fiction. Also, no surprise to anyone, the overwhelming majority of books that I've read this year are fantasy. 20 out of the 26 books I have read this year were fantasy books. I'm trying to branch out. I promise there will be videos to come of me trying to read different genres, different authors. But for right now, I am sticking to what I know and only reading fantasy books, even though that some of the books that I have read have been science fiction or manga or historical. I am a fantasy reader at heart. So my most read author is Kamome Shirahama, which, if you don't know, is the author of the Witch Hat Atelier manga. I read all 8 volumes of Witch Hat Atelier on New Year's Day, so that totally makes sense that that's the author that I've read the most. After that is Brandon Sanderson, because I have started making my way through the Cosmere with the Stormlight Archive, and I've currently read the first 2 books of the Stormlight Archive, Warbreaker and Edge Dancer. I am looking forward to reading Oathbringer very soon. And if you would like to see a Cosmere reading vlog, please leave a comment down below and give this video a like so that I will know that you want to see that. After that, you have Catherine Addison, which I won't say much about right now because I am going to talk about her books later in the video. But as you can see, I've also read 4 of her books, and yeah, I'm just gonna leave that there for now because I will be talking about her. So as you can see, the number of books and pages that I have read over the first few months of the year is all over the place. You can see that spike in January comes from when I read 8 volumes of manga in one day, but it seemed to have flattened out during February, March, and April, and then there was a spike in May, and as you see, it kind of flattened out during June as well. Now that we've gone through my Storygraph stats, we can get into the mid-year freakout tag questions. Number 1 is, what is the best book that you've read so far? So this might be a little weird, but I'm gonna say the best book that I've read so far is Lies My Teacher Told Me by James W. Lowen. So if you haven't heard of this book, I wouldn't be surprised. It is written by a sociologist, and it is basically about a bunch of different things that you probably weren't taught in your American history classes, or things that are wrong in American history textbooks. I read that book initially for an essay that I was writing for my English class, and then I ended up reading it twice in 1 month because I liked it so much. It was really informative. I'm a person who is really interested in history, specifically American history, so it scratched my brain in a very satisfying way because of that. But I also just really liked Lowen's voice. I love this book so much. I've recommended it to so many people. It is such a good book. I didn't expect to say that the best book I've read this year was a non-fiction book, but it was really informative and funny and so all of the good things. It was all of the good things. Question number 2 is, what is the best sequel that you've read so far? So the best sequel that I've read so far, I read very recently. I read it 2 days ago, and that is The Grief of Stones by Catherine Addison. That is the second book in the Cemeteries of Amalo series. The first book is The Witness for the Dead, and both of those books are set in the same universe as her novel, The Goblin Emperor. So Catherine Addison is one of my favorite authors. I really enjoyed Grief of Stones. I was glad to go back to the world of Amalo and seeing all of those characters from The Witness for the Dead. I read that entire book in one day. I listened to the audiobook. It was great. I had such a good time. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me feel every emotion that humans can feel. It was incredible. I loved it so much. Question number 3 is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but you want to? So I have a couple of books to answer this question, because there are a lot of books that have come out this year that I haven't read yet but I want to. The first book is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. This sounds like it's gonna be such an interesting, like, character heavy book. A lot of fantasy books tend to lean on the world building, and I think that's really, this book sounds like such an interesting exploration of character, so I'm really excited to pick that one up soon. The next new release that I want to read but I haven't read yet is Half a Lion by Palais E.K. Oswald. This is another fantasy book that was published at the beginning of this year, and I'm really excited to read this because it is a West African inspired fantasy, which is something that I've been reading a lot of recently. Behind me on the shelf is Raybearer and Redemptor by Jordan Ifueko. Those were some of my favorite books that I read last year. So West African fantasy is something that I'm really getting into. I want to read all of the West African fantasy that there is. And the last book that I have to answer this question is a very recent release at the time that I was recording this, and that is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. So this book sounds like it's gonna be real crazy. It sounds like it's gonna be a lot of magic, a lot of illusions, a lot of what's real, what's fake, and I am just so excited to have my mind broken by this new book. So the next question is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the book? And I once again have multiple books for this one, but this time it's only 2. The first book is, of course, Babel by R.F. Kuang. I think the entire book reading community is waiting for this book to come out. I am so excited for this book. I read The Poppy War last year. I read it so fast. It was incredible. It made me feel shrimp emotions. It was great. So I'm expecting the same things from Miss Kuang that we got in The Poppy War, where she is blending Chinese history with more fantastical elements. I was absolutely blown away by Poppy War, as a lot of us were, and I cannot wait to read this book. It sounds like it was written for me. I mean, there's history, there seems that there's gonna be linguistics, which is also another interest of mine. It sounds like the perfect book. The second book that I am excited for that will be released in the second half of this year is The Last Hero by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is the third and final book in the First Sister trilogy, and I am so excited to read it. I read the first 2 books, The First Sister and The Second Rebel, last year. I read them back to back. I was blown away. This was sort of my foray into sci-fi. I hadn't really read that much sci-fi before I read these books, and I am obsessed with them. Please go pick it up if you haven't read it yet. It's a space opera. There's found family, there's betrayal, there's biological family. It's incredible. Please go pick it up if you haven't read it. Trust me on this, you won't regret it. Number 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment? And my biggest disappointment is a very popular book, especially on Book Talk, so please do not come for me. Unfortunately, my biggest disappointment this year was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And before anyone comes for my neck, let me be clear, I rated this book 3.5 stars. It just didn't give what needs to be gave. It did not hit. I was expecting more from it because of all of the hype, because of how popular it was, and I was just let down. Unfortunately, the main storyline with our 2 main characters was not at all interesting to me, and I was much more interested in the background characters and the secondary characters. By the midpoint of the book, I was pretty much tired of the main plot and just continued reading to see what what happened and how it would end. I was bored. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Number 6 is what was your biggest surprise? And my biggest surprise this year was When the Sparrow Falls by Neil Sharpson. I am so obsessed with this book. Oh my god. This is another science fiction book that I had zero expectations for this book because this is a debut and I had never heard of it. I knew nothing. I went into it completely blind and it blew me away. I mean, this book got compared to Blade Runner in 1984, and I haven't seen Blade Runner, but I have read 1984, and let me tell you, this is leagues better than 1984, and that's saying something. I mean, I didn't see a single plot twist coming. It was such a human story. It was about authoritarianism. It was about identity in the digital age. It was so poignant. It was absolutely incredible. 5 stars for me. I loved every second. So number 7 is who is your favorite new author? And if you were waiting for me to talk about Catherine Addison, the wait is over. Catherine Addison technically is not a new author for me because I did read The Goblin Emperor at the end of last year, but because I did read The Witness for the Dead and The Grief of Stones this year, I am gonna count it. It's so nice to read a book that is focused on friendship, and I say this not because there aren't a lot of books focused on friendship, but I think that it's safe to say that a lot of media is skewed towards focusing on romance, and generally that isn't something that really interests me. So it's so nice to read books where the focus is on friendship. It's about finding your found family. It's about leaning on the people who care about you and creating a community, a support system around you. And it's just so comfy and it's so cozy. It's also in a genre that I really enjoy, a subgenre of fantasy called political fantasy, where it's sort of a ground up instead of a top down view of a fantasy world, and it's just, I don't even know what to say about Catherine Addison because I just love these books so much. Number 8 is who is your newest fictional crush? Now, I don't really have fictional crushes, but for the purpose of this question, I am gonna say Kaladin Stormblessed from the Stormlight Archive. I started reading the Stormlight Archive earlier this year, and I've absolutely loved it, and Kaladin is 100% my favorite character from this series. He's gone through so much, and I have loved watching his character arc over the first 2 books of the Stormlight Archive, from this untrustworthy and almost cold character to this very hopeful leader of Bridge 4, and I love Kaladin so much. He's great, and I'm a little nervous, but I also can't wait to see what is in store for him in the latter half of the Stormlight Archive. So the next question is, who is your newest favorite character? And I'm gonna have to go with Mosscap from A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I'm gonna talk about that book in a second, but Mosscap is so sweet and so earnest and kind, and I love that little robot so much. The next question is, what is a book that made you cry? And for this one, I'm gonna say The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer. I literally finished reading this book the day before yesterday, and I mean, I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning sobbing about this book. It was absolutely incredible. I keep saying incredible, but like it was amazing. It was fantastic. It was stupendous. I've never seen anything like it, and I never will again. So I am such an emotional sap. I love stories about found family. I love stories about friendship. I love stories where the message is hope is not naive and humanity is inherently good, and this is that story. The ending of this book literally just knocked me off my feet. It one-shot killed me from 500 feet away. I was I was not prepared for the emotional roller coaster that was this book. Highly, highly recommend it for anyone who enjoys sci-fi, who enjoys mysteries, who enjoys 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that is all I'm gonna say without giving anything else away. The next question asks, what is a book that made you happy? And for this one, I'm gonna go back to A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This book has been described as cozy punk or cozy science fiction, and I totally agree with that description. This book was literally, it felt like coming home. It felt like the beginning of The Lord of the Rings in the Shire. It was just absolutely so nice and warm and comforting to read. I mean, this book was just, it was so nice. I loved it. It was a very slow-paced book. It was very reflective as well. I mean, it asks things like, what is human nature? What is the purpose of a life on Earth? It was so nice. Despite asking all of those big questions, it was still such a little story that just warmed my heart. So the next question asks, what is the most beautiful book that you've bought this year? And I haven't actually bought any books this year, but I will say the most beautiful book that I have read this year, or I should say books, because I'm gonna say Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirehama. These books are beautiful in that the covers are gorgeous and the art is gorgeous, but also the story is so beautiful. This book is literally so sweet. It follows a bunch of like young girls who are training to be magicians. It's so comfy and it's so cozy, and I read 8 volumes of this manga in one day. If you want a sort of a low stakes fantasy read that is very heartwarming and very cute and has a lot of really interesting characters. The last question for this tag is, what are some books that you need to read by the end of the year? And I have 3 books to answer this question. The first is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, I am fully diving into the Cosmere. And I know that I probably should have started with Mistborn, but unfortunately I did start with some of the longest books that I've ever read in the Stormlight Archive. But I really, really want to pick up the Mistborn books before the year is out. I at least want to read the first one, The Final Empire, before the year is over. And I'm so excited to read more Sanderson novels. The second book that I need to read by the end of the year is a book that hasn't actually been published yet, but it will be published soon, and that is Wrath Goddess Sing by Maya Dean. If you don't know, this is basically a retelling of the Iliad that is focused on Achilles, but Achilles is in this story a trans woman, and I am just so excited to see what happens with that. That just sounds really interesting to me, and I'm really, really excited to pick this up when it comes out. You can see on my top shelf behind me that I do have the Song of Achilles on my shelf. I read it in like 2017 and I loved it. I've loaned this book out to so many people, so I'm really, really excited to read another retelling of the Iliad that is focused on Achilles, and this time she's a trans woman, which sounds just, it sounds so interesting, and I'm really, really excited to see what Maya Dean does with that. And the third book that I must read by the end of the year is also another book that hasn't been released yet, but it will be this year, and that is Travelers Along the Way by Amina May Safi. I am so excited to read this book. As soon as this book got announced, so many of my friends sent this to me because they thought it would be something that I would like, and I definitely think that I would like it as well based on the description. This book is one of the remixed classics, and it is basically a series of books where it is a classic story remixed in some way, changed in some way, and Travelers Along the Way is a Robin Hood retelling, but it takes place in Jerusalem during the Third Crusade, and that sounds so interesting. I have no idea where this is gonna go, but I am so excited to pick it up when it comes out, and I will definitely be talking about it on this channel or on my Instagram. I'll be talking about it somewhere because this book sounds so intriguing. So that was the Midyear Freakout book tag. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and send it to a friend. If you hated this video, send it to an enemy. Leave a comment down below if you have any comments about any of the books that I mentioned in this book. Tell me what some of your answers to these questions were. Be sure to follow me on Instagram if you want a lot more unhinged bookish content, and be sure to follow me on Goodreads if you want real-time updates on what I'm reading, because I update my Goodreads religiously. That is gonna do it for this video. Goodbye!